All right, it is now November, Thanksgiving Eve, 1975, and we're once again at the West 73rd Street panel. Service has been restored to all the customers. The ones that were served by the panel at 2nd Avenue are still connected up to imported ESS lines from two nearby central offices, and I'm here to make some recordings and find out what they did to replace City Tandem and Interzone Tandem, which, as it turns out, were very important to panel offices and did not come back. So they've got to be sending the calls that used to go through City and Interzone through something else. We'll find out what it is. First, though, let's make a call that goes through Midtown Tandem to the Network Management Bureau. This
The network is carrying normal traffic at this time.
is good to hear. All right, now one of the routes that the fire knocked out was City Tandem, which, until the fire, was used only by panels. Now it's just plain gone. From here, one of the places that used to go through City Tandem was a particular band of Westchester County that is between 20 and 25 miles away, including Tarrytown, White Plains, and Port Chester. Here's a call to White Plains now that things are back. Let's see what it's doing. You know, that went through CAMA, C-A-M-A, Centralized Automatic Message Accounting. Not only the called number is being sent to a tandem, in this case it's MFing to a tandem, but also the number you're calling from is being sent as well. You don't hear that, but that happens during this part of the call. Some of you may recognize that particular set of clicks as the ANIB system used in step panel and number 1 crossbar to send the number of the person making the call to a tandem so that the tandem can do the billing. That is what they use for recording long-distance calls and for the farthest out message unit calls, places that are over 30 miles away. 6 message units, 7 message units, and long distance all go through CAMA. But that was a call to White Plains, which is only a 4-message unit call, and until the fire at least, those calls did not need to go through CAMA because they were recorded on a little meter, which every non-coin line has, called a message register. It goes from 0000 to 9999 and then wraps around again. They take a picture of the message registers every month, and then they calculate your additional message units by taking the total from your message register and then the farther out message unit calls between 30 miles and 40 miles that are recorded at the CAMA office, and the two together, minus your monthly allowance, gets you the additional message unit number on your bill.
Yeah, you got your phone bill today, $280.
Right, but a 4-message unit call used to always be recorded by the message register. Something this close in, like White Plains, never used to go through CAMA. Now, up until the fire, there were 2 CAMA tandems that this panel used. One is VZ Tandem 3
2128
for northern New Jersey. The other is 10th Avenue Tandem 3,
21243.
which is used for the highest message unit calls and all the long-distance calls except northern New Jersey. This sounds like it went through 10th Avenue, but let's make sure by dialing extra digits on a call to White Plains. Oops, that was too many extra digits. See, there's this thing about panel, which is that when you dial an area code that is nearby, for example, 914 for Westchester County, it needs to look at the next 3 digits you dialed to decide how to route the call. And the way a panel does that is to sort of reset and go into a different mode. So when you dial 914, you hear that second dial tone in the background? That's an indication that the sender has now reset, so in a way it's like starting over. The 914 we dialed has been erased. All it did was go into 914 mode. So the next at least 9 digits that you dial after a local area code like 914 are going to get stored, and if it's an MF call, they will get sent. Now the thing is, the sender is also going to prefix the 914 area code that it sends to the tandem, because this particular route requires that. So it's going to send 914, followed by the 7-digit number I dialed, and then 2 of the digits that I crammed in at the end there that didn't belong did register, so it's going to send 2 more digits. That is a total of 12 digits, which no crossbar tandem ever expects to receive. So instead of getting the recording for just 1 extra digit, it's right. So that's too many extra digits. Let me do this again, dialing 914-390-1111. That is a total of 11 digits being sent to the tandem, so we won't get that reorder, but it'll still give us the recording, and we'll see what tandem it is.
We're sorry, but because of a temporary equipment condition, your call did not go through. Will you please hang up and try again? This is a recording. 21243. We're sorry, but because of a temporary equipment condition...
Yes, that is 10th Avenue Tandem 3. And by the way, now that it is toward the end of 1975, they've changed the text of all the tandem recordings. So we won't be hearing this.
I'm sorry, your call did not go through.
Instead, we'll be hearing some of the people who used to just say the ID
21211.
doing the whole recording.
We're sorry, but because of a temporary equipment condition, your call did not go through.
Welcome to the second half of the 70s. Not as quaint as the first half. Anyway, the other area that this panel used to use City Tandem to reach is the part of Nassau County, Long Island, that is between 20 and 30 miles away. This includes places like Hempstead and Hicksville, as well as communities north and south of those. And I'm sorry to say that I don't have any recordings of calls going through to those areas, simply because I discovered that those as well are going through 10th Avenue CAMA. But unlike on the White Plains side, where the call goes out on an N3 carrier trunk to a crossbar tandem, that's something at least. Here, 10th Avenue sends Nassau County through the Garden City for A.
51610.
Right, on T-carrier. which is boring, and I didn't record any of it. So City Tandem has been replaced with Gamma? Why? I know the message register used to handle it just fine. What has happened so that suddenly it has to use Gamma to record it like a long-distance call? Now, Interzone's replacement turned out to be pretty cool as long as you weren't calling Long Island. And let's get this part out of the way first, so we can get to the good stuff. The part of Long Island closest to New York City, between 15 and 20 miles away, did go through Interzone until the fire. Now, it's going through 10th Avenue Gamma. Yeah, the same as the rest of Nassau County. Here's a call to the Sperry Gyroscope Company. It goes from here to 10th Avenue Tandem 3,
21243,
to Garden City 4A over T-Carrier,
51610.
which then, over another T-Carrier link, goes to Hempstead Tandem 1 or 2,
5167, 5166.
which dials into the Step Centrex. Now, of course, that was a Hempstead Tandem Centrex, so it had to go through an extra link, Hempstead. Had we been calling a regular central office, we just would have heard a subtle tick as the 4A connected to the end office, which would begin to ring. And so from here, calls to Nassau County have become as uniform and homogenized as, well, Nassau County. But anyway, Interzone has been replaced in an interesting way when you're calling within the city. Here's a call to Staten Island, the 273 crossbar 5 in the St. George area.
Hello?
In PAL, when you do a quick flash on this kind of a trunk, you drop to reorder from the district. But I am surprised that we got this kind of a trunk calling Staten Island. What kind of trunk, you didn't ask? It's another Gamma trunk, which is very strange because this part of Staten Island is only a 2-message unit call, and I've never heard of a 2-message unit call going through Gamma. Again, the message registers are supposed to do this. Now, whatever tandem this is, it is not the long-distance tandem 10th Avenue Tandem 3. You can tell that right off the bat because the trunk sounds like this. And that is a long wire trunk with a really nice whine. This is a new tandem, and we're fortunate enough to have wire trunks to it that have a lot of character. So it's new, but it's cool. Now on that last particular call, it's very hard to tell what kind of a tandem it is, because the click of the tandem cutting through is all mixed up with noises the crossbar 5 we're calling is making. Yeah, let's get another example. 390 is the Centrex CU code for Staten Island. It's going to go through the same new tandem and then to Staten Island tandem,
21239,
which will pause while it's dialing into the Centrex.
St. Vincent's Medical Center.
Okay, so this is a number 1 ESS tandem, the way it clicked into Staten Island tandem. That's number 1 ESS. This is Williamsburg, having a whole new function in the New York City network that they had not planned for, because Williamsburg is doing the CAMA function. It's doing the billing, and that's why they had to reprogram it.
Western Electric engineers are working with New York Tel to modify software so that the Williamsburg ESS tandem office can be used to route calls
From the panel offices that previously had required Interzone tandem.
at 2nd Avenue. Western Electric engineers are modifying the Williamsburg plans to make this rerouting possible.
Okay, so this is one of the approaches that's being used to deal with the loss of Interzone. And it's kind of cool. We have nice wire trunks to it. Now, of course, we've been calling Staten Island, and Williamsburg has to have T-carrier, digital connections to Staten Island, because it's 1975, and carrier to Staten Island is the norm. You're not going to get the old-fashioned kind from a new building. But there's a very large portion of the Brooklyn sector that used to go through Interzone. And if Williamsburg is now being used for that, it's possible we can get a completely analog connection through this new tandem to certain central offices in Brooklyn. I'll do a survey and let you know. As it turns out, yes. For example, 332 is an ESS in Brooklyn's Avenue Y office. It is going through Williamsburg, and the connection sounds great. Here's a busy test, and the thing about the tones in an ESS is, when they're coming through an analog connection, they sound just pure. That sounded great. Okay, SH3 is a crossbar 1 in the Avenue Y building, and again I'm finding an analog connection here. All right, BE6 is a panel in 71st Street, Brooklyn, which also goes through Williamsburg. Not only was that an old-fashioned analog trunk, but it was very resonant. Not necessarily a good thing, but it happens. Wow. Okay, let me step back a minute and think about this, because this new tandem is providing CAMA, Centralized Automatic Message Accounting, recording the call details in the same manner as a long-distance call is recorded. But this Williamsburg tandem is replacing Interzone, which goes back to the 1940s before CAMA existed. So whatever Interzone was doing, it wasn't this. It was not CAMA. It was something else. Same with City Tandem. City Tandem goes back to the 40s. And I don't know what Interzone used to do, but the thing that is clear is that this has to do with message units, because Brooklyn has two different charging zones. Zone 6, which is the northern part of Brooklyn, and Zone 7, which is southern Brooklyn. Now, I know that the entirety of Zone 7 can be reached through Brooklyn Tandem. You can pick up the trunk, you can send the RP code, and it'll go just fine. But this panel doesn't do that. It only uses Brooklyn Tandem for Zone 6, which is a 1-message unit call. Zone 7 is 2 message units from here, and as soon as you get into Zone 7, all of a sudden, you can't use Brooklyn Tandem anymore. You got to use Interzone until recently. Now it's Williamsburg. So there's something about the fact that it's 2 message units from here that means it can't use Brooklyn Tandem even though it does connect to those places? Huh. All right, now I just thought of something else, which is, since Williamsburg now has CAMA, it has to have operators that will intervene if the automatic number identification fails. And I can arrange for that to happen because in 1971 I figured out a technique to do it every time. All it took was to know when to flash the hook switch. There's a particular point as the call is going through where if you go down, up, it makes it fail. And that means an operator has to come on the line to record your number. Let me show you what I mean first with 10th Avenue. There we go. I went down and then up. The sender didn't send, and here comes an operator.
Oh, this is me. I'm sorry. Would you just check with Rita and make sure that Miss Dixon gave me an hour aid? I have to be on my P's and Q's.
Hello?
Newsflash, she is currently not on her P's and Q's.
Hello?
Okay, I just want to make sure. Thank you. You know, I have to be sure. You understand. You have to explain it to Rita. And she better...
Hello?
Stop. Who's that? Okay.
Hello?
I tell you, Manhattan operators. I especially love this part.
She better...
Hello?
Stop. Who's that?
Who do you think? Okay, let's try this again. Same thing.
May I have your number, please?
Yes, 362. No.
9 what? 362. 362.
9990.
Thank you.
Now, the cool thing about ONI, operator number identification, at 10th Avenue is that you always hear the MFs.
362.
The place I grew up, Hempstead, would only let you hear the MFs on rare occasions. Okay, now, Williamsburg is going to have some way of bringing in an operator too. I don't expect to hear MFs, but let's try it on a Williamsburg call.
Hello? Hello?
Well, who is it? Where you have been?
Oh, did I mention that the world's second worst operators are in Brooklyn?
You did your Christmas shopping?
Please repeat the number you are calling to the special operator.
Oh, you mean the small people that left?
Okay, here's a case where the ANI failed all on its own without my help, and the operator did her job. This goes to the RN3 crossbar 5 in Avenue I over a wire connection from Williamsburg.
Number you're calling from, please?
362-9990.
Thank you.
To review what we have found so far, everything that went through City Tandem was either a 4 or a 5 message unit call, and all of that has been replaced now with 10th Avenue Kama.
21243.
Interzone Tandem used to handle all of the 2 and 3 message unit calls with one exception, Westchester County. The 2 and 3 message unit calls to Westchester County went through Mount Vernon Tandem 1 before, and they still do. When we call Dobbs Ferry, for example, the 914 gives us a second dial tone in the background. Then when we dial the office code, you can hear the setup for that same old-school revertive pulse protocol. Ah, there it is. That's the original way to use a crossbar tandem, with revertive pulse. York Tandem and Brooklyn Tandem do the same thing. And it used to be City and Interzone did that too. All the other 2 and 3 message unit calls went through Interzone, and what's happening now depends on where you're calling. Western Nassau County, including Great Neck, Floral Park, Lynbrook, are all 3 message unit calls from here, and that area is going through 10th Avenue Kama. Used to go through Interzone. Now there is an area that is 3 message units that is going through Williamsburg Kama, and that is the southernmost part of Staten Island. That last central office, the one that's somewhere down there in the southern part of the island, is in its own zone, Zone 15. It's a 3 message unit call from here, and that does go through Williamsburg Kama. The other Staten Island zone, Zone 14, which is the rest of the island, is a 2 message unit call and is also going through Williamsburg Kama. Southern Brooklyn, Zone 7, also 2 message units, is going through Williamsburg. Now on the day of the fire, calling out to Eastern Queens, well, we couldn't. Bayside, for example, is in the Queens sector, and Queens Tandem was working just fine that day, but for some reason this panel couldn't use Queens Tandem to call Bayside, even though it is in that sector. Well, we now know that's because Bayside is further out, it's a 2 message unit call, and so at this point I'm expecting Bayside to go through Williamsburg Kama as well. Let's try calling a Bayside crossbar 1. Haha, now I did not expect that. This is the old school way. There's some crossbar tandem, or maybe an ESS pretending to be one, that is not Interzone, and whatever this is was not there on the fire day either. Let's keep dialing and see where this goes. Boy, talk about old school. That is a long wire connection. In fact, here's another call to Bayside starting to go through, and you can even hear it going into oscillation for a second. Oh, that's great. Let me turn that up. Yup, that's the network I love. Now, there's another funny thing about this particular route. Very often, when something goes off hook just for a fraction of a second, there's a click on the trunk and an extra hum comes on the line. I have no idea what this is. Here's a Bayside supervision test where that happened. The trunk was hummy enough to begin with, but then I don't know. Now, in any case, this has to be, I can't think what else it would be but Richmond Hill, because it's a long wire trunk and it's being used to cover the Queens sector, and Richmond Hill does take revertive pulsing this way, so it makes sense that this would be Richmond Hill, but there's a problem, which is that we already have Richmond Hill. There's a relatively new T-carrier trunk group that MFs to Richmond Hill, which is used to call places like Jamaica. Let's dial some extra digits on one of those.
We're sorry, but because of a temporary equipment condition, your call did not go through. Will you please hang up and try again? This is a recording. 21237. We're sorry.
See what I mean? I've already got a Richmond Hill. So what's this new old school type thing we've got? In a few minutes, I'm going to call Ben and see what he can find out. In the meantime, let's try calling Laurelton. That's in the Richmond Hill sector, but it couldn't go through on the fire day. Let's see what it's doing now.
Hello?
There was the hum again. So I've checked, and we have all of Zone 11, Bayside, all of Zone 12, which is Hollis, Floral Park, and Laurelton, and Zone 13, the Rockaways. They all go through this new old route. Here's a call to a non-working number in the Far Rockaway 471 office that has that infamous recording that would very often be used as a conference.
Temporarily disconnected. The number you have reached is not in service at this time. I'm sorry. The number you have reached is not in service at this time or temporarily disconnected. Hello? Is not in service at this time.
When we first came into the recording, it either went off hook or it flashed. Either way, that extra hum clicked on.
Temporarily disconnected. The number you have reached
Then I heard what sounded like somebody clicking in and out.
is not in service at this time. I'm sorry. The number you have reached is not in service at this time or temporarily disconnected.
So I said hello in case there was a switchman, I don't know, butting in with a test set or something. But nobody said hello. Okay, let's make another call to Zone 13, to Bell Harbor, where I can call Ben. This call will also go through the mystery route, but I'm going to ask Ben not to go off hook because I don't want to charge the person I'm staying with for a 2-message unit call. So when he answers, I'm going to tell him to hang up. At that point, we'll be talking with his phone hung up. We're phone freaks, we can do that sort of thing.
Hango.
Gwinnett Associates.
Here's what I can tell you.
Yeah.
It has Queen's tandem, although it doesn't send 830 there.
All right.
Richmond Hill, Bushwick it also has. There's a problem though. There are 2 RP tandems, and one of them we're talking through right now. And I can tell the difference between them because one goes dong, and the other doesn't quite so much.
Is that the kind of...
Yeah, now I know what the thumb is from. It's just from the flashing.
That's what happened on... Same thing that happens on the 339. I know it. I know immediately. Like when it goes to tongue, it's like right after it's flashed, you know?
Yeah, right.
This was an early conversation. I hadn't even gotten the whole picture yet. Actually, there are 4 revertive tandems, namely Mount Vernon to call Westchester, York to call parts of Manhattan and Bronx, Brooklyn to call Brooklyn, and this 4th one that I'm talking to Ben through, which I strongly suspect but can't quite believe, is Richmond Hill. And the reason I suspect but can't quite believe it is that there is an MF trunk to Richmond Hill on T-Carrier already, and now this new trunk group has been added that uses revertive pulse over wire to Richmond Hill, apparently, because what else could it be?
Yeah, both revertive and MF to Richmond Hill. It's an interesting idea, isn't it?
So I asked Ben to call up West 73rd Street panel and ask them where they are sending things like Bayside. And you know what the answer turned out to be? Richmond Hill. So yes, there are 2 trunk groups to Richmond Hill. The new one is the one working with old technology, namely wire trunks and revertive pulse. The older one is T-Carrier with MF. Make that make sense? On this next call, Ben and I are playing with that strange phenomenon where a short off-hook period causes a hum to tick onto the line and stay there for the rest of the call.
Okay, now flash. Now, I have a tape of the supervision test making it do that. Did it? What is that?
That hum?
Yeah, it came on. You'll never get rid of it. I'm gonna dial it again, okay?
Globe.
Say a few words.
Few words? Okay.
Now start flashing. Can't believe that. What's it for?
You think it's an alarm?
Maybe I was just charged.
Hey, yeah, that's right. Let's find out. What's timeout like on panel?
Through these things, God knows what happens.
What is timeout on panel? 20 seconds?
I'm not sure. I'll have to see what it is on a real local call.
You ought to record timing out.
Now it's a good thing that Ben brought that up, timing out, because had he not done so, we might not have found out what's really going on here. This call went on for a few minutes, proving that the presence of this hum that comes on doesn't mean any kind of timeout relay has been engaged, because I never timed out. But now that we want timeout to get on tape, I'm going to call back and Ben is going to answer normally so that I am charged for the call. Then he'll hang up on me and we'll keep talking until I time out.
Hello?
Hello? Why 4 of them?
Yeah, Wi-Fi.
The noise came on immediately this time. Apparently the noise doesn't mean you're charged. I guess the noise means it's pricking up its ears or something. I don't know.
What about that noise? What does that mean?
That means you're on soup to me and I will time out the dial zone. Let's see how long it takes, okay?
I think it's 20 seconds.
Of course, so many crossbar 1s are 20 seconds. In fact,
Who said that?
Steve's office is 20 seconds.
Oh, I haven't even known any personal one said. That's nice.
We need to make a record of the fact that
Bye-bye,
crossbar...
Evan.
Now the hum
Hello?
Hello?
turned out to be a red herring. Not only did we find that it had nothing to do with charging or being timed out, it completely disappeared by 1977. My 1977 tapes have no sign of it. So to this day, I don't know why it was there on Thanksgiving 1975. But the sound we really do need to pay attention to is this.
Why 4 of them?
Yeah, Wi-Fi.
By now, Ben and I have noticed that every time I call him and he answers his phone normally, there are 4 loud ticks within the first few seconds. And it turns out those 4 ticks are the sign that I'm charged and will be timed out if he hangs up on me, not the hum. And haven't we heard that sound somewhere before?
Temporarily disconnected. The number you have reached is not in service at this time. I'm sorry, the number you have reached is not in service at this time.
Yup, there it is. The recording was going off hook. That's why the hum and the 4 ticks happened. I was charged for that call. And that brings me to another memory that I was hearing regularly until the day of the fire, in fact. Whenever someone would call me on my parents' Lynbrook, Long Island phone line from any Manhattan panel, this is what I would hear. Hello? And at this point, the person in Manhattan would start talking. And as they were talking, those 6 loud banging noises, really, really loud, would be competing with them for attention, and the banging noises usually won. I had no idea what it meant. I just knew it happened when people from panels called me from Manhattan. And for me, this crunk noise was always on the line. Turned out it was Interzone tandem, The trunks to Lynbrook 3 always sounded like this. Now from here, there is another route besides Richmond Hill that does handle 2 message unit calls without using CAMA, and that is Mount Vernon. Now normally when we're making preservation tapes and we call a random person and they answer, we just hang up because we don't want to pay for the call. But this time, let's call somebody in Yonkers. That goes through Mount Vernon. And let's pay for the call. If they answer, we'll just stay on the line silently and see if those ticks happen. This is the Yonkers Crossbar 5 via Mount Vernon. Four ticks. And what do you know? In 1975 at least, Mount Vernon had a mystery hum of its own. Different from Richmond Hill, but it acts the same way. Shortly after the first off-hook, it comes on. And, like Richmond Hill, this hum was gone in 1977. Alright, well Mount Vernon also does handle some 3-message unit calls. How about Dobbs Ferry?
Hello? Hello?
That was 6 ticks. So whatever this is, it does mean I'm being charged, and the number of ticks is always equal to the number of message units times 2. So now what's with the ticks? What is this? Well, here's what Joe Lally, Network Operations Manager for New York Tel, said when someone who was not familiar with this technology asked about it.
It's a big headache is what it is. Oh, you don't know about remote charging?
No.
Yeah, blast from the past. Hey, you know those little meters, the message registers that the number 1 crossbars used to have?
Yeah, I've seen those.
Right. Well, the panels have them too, but the panels don't know how to increment the meters for multi-message unit calls without help. And the help for doing that, first and foremost, was coming from Interzone tandem and then city tandem.
Remote charging, also known as remote control zone registration. It never would have occurred to Ben or me that something like this would ever be done. But in the 40s, they decided to have certain tandems not just act as tandems, but also increment the message registers in the local panel offices by remote control. Once you got over 10 miles, 2 message units to 5 message units, that's when they used remote charging.
And the help for doing that, first and foremost, was coming from Interzone tandem and then city tandem. And now that those are gone, we no longer have the central core of the system for remote charging, but we still have the periphery. we got Mount Vernon doing remote charging still for the benefit of the Manhattan and Bronx panels, but even that only goes as far as the 3-message unit band. We got Jamaica and Richmond Hill providing remote charging to Nassau for the benefit of the Brooklyn and Queens panels. And so Mount Vernon, Jamaica, Richmond Hill, plus a little bit of capacity in York is all we have left. And that's all there is to work with now. Just as an example, the panels in Manhattan used to use Interzone for calling the far reaches of Queens that are 2-message units. Well, we can't do that anymore, but it turns out there's a little extra capacity to charge 2-message units in Richmond Hill. We can use that for Manhattan. And so for the first time, Richmond Hill will be helping Manhattan panels charge for calls to Queens. So that we can do. We got to put in entirely new trunks for that, unfortunately.
Didn't we put in Richmond Hill for Manhattan just a short time ago?
Yeah, we did. Back a year and a half ago. That's right. But we can't use those for remote charging.
Why not?
Well, this is such old stuff, I feel like I'm talking about antique tandem bicycles instead of crossbar tandems. But anyway, the way the remote charging pulse is sent is the tandem puts 130 volts down both conductors of the trunk. Obviously, it's a wire cable pair type trunk, all right? And then each pulse of 130 volts on both conductors gets picked up at the panel office, and the relays there advance the meter. Now, these trunks that we put in a year and a half ago are T-carrier. And we got reverter pulse on T-carrier, but we don't have remote charging on T-carrier. The new trunks have to be cable paired.
So the reason we got brand new, old-fashioned trunks to Richmond Hill is because they scrounged around and found a little extra capacity at that tandem, and that tandem does serve all of Queens, so they used it. And that's why we get Richmond Hill calling Ben and Bayside and the rest of the far reaches of Queens. The T-carrier trunks couldn't be used for remote charging because there's no way to send the 130-volt signal or equivalent on T-carrier.
And the other thing, of course, is that remote charging works with revertive pulsing, and those trunks to Richmond Hill that they've got are MF.
That's a bunch of panels to Richmond Hill. Why MF? Why not revertive?
That is a good question, and I can tell you why. You remember why we put in Richmond Hill for the panels?
Remind me.
We were retiring Metropolitan and Knickerbocker. And at that time, the capacity to retire them that enabled us to put all that traffic on Richmond Hill was opened up by the fact that Nassau stopped using Richmond Hill as the final route for the city. Remember that? It was the final route for the city until Garden City came in. And that capacity that opened up at that time, a year and a half ago, was MF capacity because that's how the Nassau offices torqued to Richmond Hill on the final route. Okay, so that's what opened up a year and a half ago. That's why we have MF trunks. So the whole thing is incompatible with this flashback to the 40s that we got to do now. But I'm glad we found the capacity. We got plenty of wires. We can do it. So that's the good news.
So we got plenty of wires. Are we going to make one big trunk route for Richmond Hill?
That is a good question, except in this case it's moot, because the remote charging equipment is in such short supply that we don't want to put single message unit calls on those same trunks. We want to save them for the 2-message unit calls. So there's going to be 2 separate trunk groups to the same tandem in this case. So anyway, now I got to get to the bad news, which is that for the rest of the job of replacing City and Interzone, we got to use, I hate to say this, we got to use Gamma.
There's your headache.
You're going to put a lot of 212 traffic on the long-distance tandems, right?
Well, you won't hear me saying I like the idea, but here's the thing. With the exception of the Richmond Hill capacity that we pulled out of mothballs, we don't have anything for the 2-message unit calls, just within 212. We got panels on all 5 of the existing Gamma tandems. I mean, my first thought which horrified me was that from each of the 5 existing Gamma tandems, we would have to put in trunks to pretty much every sector tandem, with the possible exception of Bushwick and Kings, because they're so centrally located that they don't have a lot of 2-message unit and higher calls go into those areas. But they all got to have trunks to Queens tandem, to Richmond Hill, to Staten Island, to Brooklyn for sure, and all 5 have to put in trunk groups to at least 5 sector tandems. Now for the suburbs it's not as bad, because for Nassau, for the places that don't have it covered already, we can just put a huge trunk group into Garden City and call it a day. For Westchester, we got to add White Plains 1 and some Mount Vernon, and that'll cover it. I don't like this idea, but I can deal with it. But the thing about calls within 212 really kind of stuck in my craw for a long time, and I finally thought of something, which is Williamsburg. We just put that in. And as far as I knew, there was no software for Williamsburg to do Gamma. But I called Bell Labs just in case they were about to come out with it. Maybe they could speed it up. And you know what? It turns out that the first #1 ESS Gamma tandem went in someplace in Texas just in October. So if this had happened a year earlier, we wouldn't have this option. But they say they can do it. So I'm looking at putting all the 212 Gamma on Williamsburg, which already has a very good outgoing trunk field. All we got to do is add Staten Island. So that's the good news within the bad news. We don't have to go all out putting all those local trunks in the long-distance Gammas. Now we can use Williamsburg for within the city.
I could listen to that guy talk all day. And that's why I thought it was better to put him at the end of this long program rather than have me drone on and on about this stuff. There's no doubt that conversations like that were going on in the first few days after the fire. Unfortunately, I don't have tapes of any of those conversations, so that is a dramatization. That's not real, I made it up. But it's correct as far as I know. The telephone sounds are always real, unless I say otherwise, and actually I've only had to fake a phone sound once, a Mexican payphone. Many thanks to the Jolly Roger Telephone Company, whose assistance enabled me to get this project off the ground, and to Brian Smart, who assisted in my finishing this project and has helped me be ready to produce more programs more quickly than I ever thought possible. It's a good thing Ben asked about timeout on panel. Otherwise, we might never have found this layer of the network, the remote charging layer. And the funny thing is that thanks to this knowledge that this layer of the network existed, we had to spend several hours making phone calls to nowhere just to hear ourselves being charged for the call. Not very phone freak-like, but hey, I've got the tapes. Thanks so much for listening.